Minecraft server, not a problem. That sort of stuff. Oh my god, how did I miss that?
Things. In fact, I'll actually stand this up here real quick. Well, not in that fashion. Or that fashion either. You can tell I'm good with handling things. You know, I'm an IT professional. That's the joke. Good, folks. Today I bring to you a video on a computer which you will see some more appearances of in future videos. But in this one, we're just going to take a look at the hardware of this machine and see what it has to offer. Spoiler alert, it's made by Dell. Obviously, who else? It's got a Xeon processor, or rather two Xeon processors. It was designed for Windows 7, but obviously it's not what we're going to be running because that's out of support these days. But, you know, it's got a license I can reuse. But today, we've got a Dell Precision T5500 workstation computer. Yes, I now have another dual processor Xeon workstation, and it is absolutely gloriously heavy. So, the T5500, what an absolute unit. I know that this particular unit was manufactured on the 1st of July 2010, so I wouldn't necessarily call this thing a late production unit, but it was definitely within the life cycle of the T5500. Now, don't forget that this is actually based on socket LGA 1366, unlike some of the other Precisions you might see with this case design that were on 775, like the lower end Core 2 Duo based versions of these. This one actually has the fancier platform that actually supports dual processors, and it uses similar architecture to the first gen Core i7 processor, basically something similar to that effect. This is just the Xeonified version, if you will. Now currently this system has dual Xeon E5620 CPUs in it, which are 4-core, 8-thread processors apiece, so 8 cores and 16 threads. So back in 2010, this would have actually been a fairly powerful workstation for what you would need to get done. And what's also nice is the BIOS of this system actually supports two types of multiprocessor technologies. I believe there's SMP and NUMA, which is really cool because you can actually switch between the two on the fly if you ever really needed to, you know, enable that sort of stuff on a reboot. Yeah, absolutely. You could go SMP if you need to run something like Windows XP, which doesn't support NUMA, or let's just say you wanted to run Windows 8 or newer. Yeah, you could absolutely run in NUMA mode, and there you go. It just supports both modes, which is fantastic. Now, I will put a little bit of an asterisk next to the CPUs that this machine has because they're only in there for now. I have ordered a set of upgrades for this thing in the form of Xeon X5650 processors, which are the 6-core, 12-thread processors on the 1366 socket. And that'll mean the system will have 12 cores and 24 threads when I'm all said and done. Now, as far as RAM goes, it's got 12 gigs currently of triple channel ECC DDR3 at 1066 megahertz. That is the fastest RAM this will run. That's just how it goes because, you know, in 2010, that's about the best that technology could let us do. In fact, even some systems are probably still lagging behind with DDR2 memory, depending on when you bought them, and depending on the model, of course. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about some of the other specifics. So in this case, as you can see, my unit does not have the FireWire option, but it would have been right here if it was optioned with it. But it's still got two USB ports on the front, as well as a microphone and headphone jack. And of course, there's some other Dell goodies in here, like your 4 status lights on the front, which are kind of nice to have. I know nowadays they substitute the 4 lights with a blinking power light code instead. And I suppose that's probably more efficient in design because you don't have all these lights cluttering up the front panel and you have more room to work around in the case to minimalize and whatever. So I can understand that reasoning. But still, I like these old Dell 4 light codes because they're easy to get information on because you know exactly what's going on. You don't have to sit there and read the codes or whatever. There's also a hard drive light and a LAN status light. So that's also good to have, especially on a system like this, where you might not be able to get towards the back of the system if it's in a desk or something like that, or heck, even in a rack, because these things could probably be rack mounted, I'm sure. Now, this system is not the T7000 series machine, so as such, this only has two 5¼ inch bays and one 3½ inch bay, which is kind of a good use of space there, Dell. Good job. This has a basic DVD-RW drive, nothing fancy, just what you would expect. I don't even think these things would be capable of doing Blu-rays because I don't think they have the proper instruction sets. Although I have upgraded the graphics card in this computer. You'll see that once we open up the case, which I'll do here probably in a little bit. But either way, one interesting thing about this machine that I didn't actually know, this actually has two front-mounted cooling fans, and they intake, of course, on the front. So one actually sits behind here, and another one sits down here. And I believe in this system's layout, this is actually where, in this area, the first processor is mounted on the main motherboard, and the second processor actually sits on a daughter board that actually plugs into the main motherboard with its own 3 DDR3 RAM slots, which is actually fairly fascinating. And you'll see that when we open up the case, of course. It has its own little cooling fan for the RAM, and it sits on a riser card. It's very fascinating stuff, honestly. And no, this is not plastic. This is actually metal. I want to say that this whole front piece is anodized aluminum because it looks like anodized aluminum, and it probably doesn't look too far off from being that. It looks very much like the kind of thing Apple would do, much like their old cheese grater Mac Pro, or even as far back as the Power Mac G5. So I actually rather like the look of these systems. They look so industrial, professional, and honestly, they actually still look pretty dang nice today, if I'm going to be honest, in my opinion. I know some people are probably partial to this or don't like the design, and that's fair, but I honestly still think it looks pretty dang good, especially if you can find one in good shape, which this one does have a little bit of wear, but it's really not even that bad, so it's whatever. Oh yeah, one little tidbit about this system for those who plan to get one. Be prepared to lift a pretty heavy system. I haven't actually taken the exact measurement of my system, but I can probably estimate that it's around the neighborhood of 35 to 40 pounds physically, because we did some weight test comparisons between this system here and my Power Mac G5, and of course mine is the quad G5, so that means that the case weighs approximately 50 pounds all in. So the system doesn't have the handles, nor does it feel nearly as dense as the Power Mac, so probably in the neighborhood of like high 30s, low 40s in the weight department as far as pounds are concerned. I don't know about kilograms. Somebody could probably look that up and put it down below, or heck, even in a subtitle, because you know how lazy I can be. Woo, correct myself in the subtitles all the time. But let's get this thing rotated around, and we'll take a look at the rear I/O real quick. Won't go too crazy over it, but you know, I am still going to show it off. So to start off, we have our power supply. In this unit's case, it has an 875 watt power supply because, of course, it has to power 2 CPUs and it has to power a graphics card. So, makes sense. Down below that, we have our expansion slots. Because this is a dual processor workstation, it actually has dual PCI Express X16 slots with full bandwidth, which is pretty sweet. The only reason, of course, why they're able to do this is because it's got 2 physical processors, and the power supply is big enough that you can actually kind of sort of have dual workstation graphics cards probably running an SLI or Crossfire in a system like this, although whatever professional term that they would use for that sort of stuff, like I think NVLink, which obviously NVLink is way newer than this system can ever dream of handling, but you get the idea. But it's also got some other PCI Express slots in there as well, which is pretty nice. In fact, actually, speaking of graphics cards, there you can see my Radeon RX 560 sitting in there. In fact, actually, if you give me a moment to jump cut, I'll actually show you what this thing came with when it was new. And yes, I can verify this based on the service tag. All right, are you ready, kids? Here is the graphics card that this thing came with when it was new. This is it. This is the NVIDIA Quadro NVS 420. Nice number, blaze it. This graphics card is meant for the professional 2D side of things. In fact, I'll actually stand this up here real quick. Well, not in that fashion, or that fashion either. You can tell I'm good with handling things. You know, I'm an IT professional. That's the joke. When Dell was actually making their brochure for the system, if you will, their sales brochure, the NVS 420 was on the list of a professional 2D graphics card. Now, as far as 3D goes, I really couldn't tell you for sure, but I can definitely say this graphics card was on the lowest end of graphics that you could actually get on one of these workstations, because obviously a 1366 socket platform does not have integrated graphics of any kind, and that holds true for the consumer enthusiast side of things. So of course you had to sell it with some kind of display adapter, and this was about as cheap as they came. So obviously I took this out not just because of the fact that, number one, it sucks. Number two, you can't actually use these for folding at home anymore, as I learned, because their driver model is too old. The Quadro NVS 420 is actually based on NVIDIA's Tesla architecture. It goes way back. So obviously its compute drivers is not compatible with folding at home these days. And lastly, of course, if you haven't already noticed, the connector to connect the video card is non-standard. If I can get it stable here, you can see it looks like a SCSI connector on the back, but it absolutely isn't. So, you know, obviously I have no idea what kind of adapter, oops. I have no idea what adapter Dell decided to come up with for this graphics card this week, but I can tell you this much, it's definitely not DMS59. So, I mean, at least with DMS59, I have an adapter for it. I can at least use a VGA monitor, but no, that goofy proprietary crap, get that away from me. I'm not interested in dealing with that. So, obviously, because I had intentions of swapping out the graphics card anyway, I decided to do just that. Now, absolutely, I think I could probably put something more powerful in a computer like this, but if I remember correctly, I believe the processors in the system's case are actually limited to PCI Express Gen 2. So I figured something simple, sensible, like an RX 560 should get the job done. No, it's not the most powerful graphics card. I could easily stick something more powerful in this system, no doubt. You know, obviously, something a little bit more powerful would probably be just fine, especially given that I'm going to be upgrading the CPUs to Xeon X5650s. But, you know what, for right now, it'll do the job just fine. It only runs on one 6-pin connector. This power supply needs, or it has two 6-pin connectors. So I think we'll be just fine. Maybe I could use this as a graphics card test bench system for older GPUs or something. Let me know if you'd like to see something like that down below in the comments. Either way, let's finish off this I/O overview in as unexciting of glory as it usually is. On the motherboard here, you can see we've got a serial port and a parallel port. Obviously, this is a knockout plug for where the VGA would go, but since this is 1366, it doesn't have any integrated video of any kind, so that is a knockout plug. There's nothing there. PS2 keyboard and mouse, which is always nice to see, although unlike their optiplexes of this era, at least the 780s or the late Core 2 Duo systems in the BTX form factor like this system is in, technically, kind of sort of upside down ATX, but proprietary anyways. But the BTX optiplexes that were still being made by Dell at this time didn't have this on board, so it's really nice to see this especially. It's got 4 USB 2.0 ports there, although it's got 2 more up there, so it's got 6 total. It's got eSATA, which is nice to see on a system like this, fairly typical for the time period. But of course, nowadays, if you want to use modern storage, you just use USB in some of its flavors. You have basic onboard audio, although I suppose if you wanted to actually do something serious with audio, you'd install a PCI Express sound card. I almost said CLARD. That would have been a great word. And then, of course, as typical for a workstation, it's got Pro class gigabit networking on the motherboard. Specifically, I think this uses Intel Pro gigabit networking on the motherboard. Of course, if you wanted 10 gig, you'd have to install a PCI Express card for that. And of course, since this system is new enough, you can put a 10 gig LAN card in this and will not suffer a bottleneck. So that's actually pretty nice. Oh, God. Holy crap, it looks like I can actually get pretty much everything in view on the standard lens. That's actually kind of impressive. So, first things first, you might notice in the lower left, the hard drives, well, in this case, just one, but this actually has 2 hard drives. There's actually an extra bay up here that you can add a hard drive into, which is actually pretty slick. Of course, optionally, you can put one here, but they don't seem like they at least adhere to that sort of standard 100%, because you can actually take off this bracket via 3 screws. It'll then hinge up and out of the way, and you can actually install a much larger graphics card in this case, which is very thoughtful thinking. It's usually not very Dell-like to do that, but this is a precision. This thing probably cost multi-$1,000, so it better have that functionality. Anyways, the hard drive in this case is not the original, I don't believe. This is probably some other drive, but this does have a Western Digital Velociraptor hard drive, if anybody remembers what those are. It's basically a 10,000 RPM serial ATA hard drive. In my case, I have the 300 gig version, and it actually seems to go through this like adapter kit right here. Since this is normally a 2.5-inch hard drive, it just has this custom caddy or whatever, or maybe this isn't Western Digital's thing, and it just breaks out into standard SATA on this. It's not a SAS drive, it's actually SATA, so that's pretty nifty to have. Pretty nice hard drive too. In fact, you don't actually hear it too badly. Even despite the 10,000 RPM, it's a fairly quiet drive. I'm actually pretty surprised by that. Anyways, there you can see up here is the power supply, kind of, sort of. It's a bit cut off, I know, but not much I can really do without knocking my phone over, and I don't feel like doing that and ear-raping everybody in the audience. But you're not missing much. It's just the 80 plus silver rated power supply at 875 watts maximum combined output. So it's not too bad, I guess. Obviously, it would have been nice to see an 80 plus gold certified power supply, but I imagine the system at that time, it really wasn't that big a deal. 80 plus certifications were definitely a big deal, but not a massive deal as such. But now let's go ahead and take a look at behind this riser card here. And in pretty easy fashion, you can just tilt this down. You obviously have to unclip it. But this will just simply pull down, and then this whole thing will scoot out on a tray, and boom. So here's an up-close look at that riser card. As you can see down here, it's got 3 DDR3 RAM slots, and currently this takes, like I said, 1066 megahertz memory at maximum. It has to be ECC because this is a Xeon system. There you can see it has its own cooler on the processor, and it also has a fan for the RAM, which of course you probably do need that because, let's be fair, this RAM probably runs hot. So it's no joke. You're probably going to need something like that. In fact, they actually have that same setup on the motherboard, only the motherboard has 6 RAM slots versus just 3 on this expansion card, but that makes sense. But as you can see, it has its own baffle there to cool the RAM, and there's also the baffle down there to cool the processor. Kind of the same thing here. And there's also a fan to cool the chipset on the motherboard, or whatever it's being cooled by there. You can see the big heat pipe going onto the heatsink there into the fan. And there's also another little Easter egg. There is an internal USB port there on the motherboard. So that's a pretty nice touch. So don't know what you'd put in there, but hey, you can put something in that USB port. That is pretty sweet. I don't know if it's something you can put like a Wi-Fi adapter or Bluetooth adapter, or heck, even a flash drive for that matter, but at least it's still nice to see. There you can kind of see the connectors on the motherboard, those 2 white blocks dense with pins. That's what this board connects to interface directly with the system bus. So let's take a look at some of the slots. As you can see, right there is a ×8 length PCI Express slot. Right above that is one of the full power X16 slots. Again, PCI Express Gen 2 in this regard because that's the limitation of the CPU. That's my XFX Radeon RX 560 4 gig. And you can actually see there is a 64-bit PCI slot in there, which is actually pretty nice. So it's at least got one slot for legacy expansion, and it's 64 bits. That's pretty cool. And there you can kind of see the rest of the system functionality around that big heatsink there. There's the, I would assume, some kind of an Intel controller of some kind. I can't read the part number from this far back. You'll have to forgive me for not wanting to dig inside of here. It's a bit dark, but there you can kind of see some of the stuff there. Actually, I was wrong about the Ethernet. I thought this had Pro Intel networking. It actually has a Broadcom chip. So I apologize. For those who looked up the service tag and made your comments, I apologize. But yeah, that's really all there is to say regarding inside this system. I think I've done the best that I can. So why don't we say we put this all back together and fire it up. All right, and it's just as easy to turn this thing on as pressing the power button, so let's do that now. Being that this is something that uses ECC memory, it does take a minute to post. Not literally, but it does take longer than usual. All right, so here we are in Windows 10. It's nothing fancy, just a fresh install with a few different things installed, including a game that I suppose we can try testing. Of course, the obligatory golf with your friends. Why wouldn't it be? But we can take a look at a couple different things here while we're in Windows. First of which, I can just hit Windows key X and then press Y to get into the system properties. And as you can see, Intel Xeon CPU E5620 at 2.4 gigahertz, but there's 2 physical processors. And of course, you have to run the Pro version of Windows because of the dual physical processors due to the way that the Windows licensing works. Because of course, Windows 10 Home is only meant for a single processor. Now, I know some people might get that confused, and this used to actually be a thing back in the days of Windows XP, and for that matter, even Vista and 7. But basically, if you had a system with more than one physical processor, you actually had to buy the Pro version of Windows in order to actually make use of that second or more processors. And of course, that doesn't really hold true for systems that have multi-core processors. That's totally fine, because obviously multi-core processors started becoming a thing in about 2005, or 2006, if you will. More mainstream anyway, like the Intel Core 2 Duo. So basically, yeah, a multi-core processor is supported, but not a multi-processor system, even with multiple cores. So in this case, I don't have to run Windows 10 Pro for workstations. That's a completely different licensing version. And obviously I could just run standard Windows 10 Pro and I will have access to all processors, which is actually not too bad, I suppose. I figured they would have changed it, but you know how it is with Microsoft, anything changes at whatever granted given time. So if I go into Task Manager here, you can go under Performance, you can basically see it says 2 sockets, 8 cores, 16 logical processors, or basically threads. And another thing too, since I have it enabled, what's nice is you can actually look at the individual NUMA nodes in the system. And this is great for like Windows Server, where in Windows Server, you'll have a lot of machines in a cluster, and I believe it'll allow you to actually look at all the processors or each NUMA node and its CPU usage. This is basically showing each physical processor and its cores and threads inside of one of these windows, which is absolutely brilliant. So if you want to have a simplified usage of what's actually running on each NUMA node, say you're doing something with a virtualization server or whatever the case might be, it's actually pretty nice to see this actually being Windows just baked right in. I've always had systems that have had this blanked out because my old HP XW6600, it actually only supported SMP because it was a much older design on LGA 771. NUMA wasn't a thing then. And of course, I had my Dell Precision T5600, but that was a single CPU system. It only had one physical CPU socket. So obviously that didn't really work out for being able to turn on anything with NUMA. But this system is probably one of the earliest to support it. So that's pretty cool to be able to play around with it. More modern, more capable multi-processing. I'm obviously new when it comes to all the terminology, even if with taking college, but it was an entry-level course, so it is what it is. So I can't be too surprised at, and of course, we were on older books, so take it for what you will. I don't take specific courses unless I absolutely have to. So anyways, I digress. So why don't we go ahead and try launching some stuffs. I'll go ahead and open up MSI Afterburner for the sake of opening MSI Afterburner here. So here we go. As you can see, Radeon RX 560 series down there. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to do a direct capture because I don't have a direct capture device. So we're going to have to do the classic point the camera at the screen trick here. But I'm going to go ahead and minimize this here. And as I mentioned before, I do have a secondary hard drive in this, and that's what I use pretty much as a game drive because I don't want to clog up the 300 gig Velociraptor. So it'll help actually speed up the system quite a bit by doing that. Now, I am planning on putting some more games on this second hard drive in the future, and I actually would like to test this system before and after upgrades. And I'm hoping that what I plan to do is to, I don't know what graphics card I will use in particular. I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with the RX 560
or if I'm going to use something more modern like my GTX 1650, because both cards do fit in the system. Or for that matter, I could even use that card there and just leave the side panel off just for the sake of testing, even though it won't be a permanent addition. I could always use that card too, because that would actually work. The problem is, of course, the PCI Express Gen 2 is the bottleneck, but, you know, honestly, I don't think this graphics card up here will even touch the limits of that, and maybe the GTX 1650 might, but I know the RX 560 won't. So it is kind of what it is. You know, you kind of have to deal with the limitations of that. But even still, I mean, it's still a very powerful, very capable system. And heck, if the i7 2600 can still play games with respectable settings and frame rates these days, and it only has PCI Express Gen 2, then this thing will be just fine. The only thing it probably hurts is the memory bandwidth because of the low clock speed at 1066 megahertz, but there's nothing I can really do about that. That's just the limitation of the architecture. So as you can see, we're at 1080p Ultra with VSync turned on, and I'll actually go ahead while I'm in here, I'm going to turn that off because I figure what the heck, will not only flex the RX 560 to its full potential, which will probably make it run at like almost 80 degrees because it loves to do that. Not to look into the thermal paste once again of this card because the heatsink kind of sucks. But you can also get an idea as to the temperatures and the usage of the CPUs. Fortunately, a good number of the games I own are actually multiprocessor aware. Especially the more modern games will actually take advantage of all the cores across 2 NUMA nodes. So that actually helps with the CPU usage, and it means that I can get better frame rates with a more powerful card. But of course, in this case, having these 2 processors allows the even unoptimized Golf with Your Friends here to run at its maximum potential. So that's actually pretty nice. So I mean, it's a full-fledged system that you could technically use for gaming. No, it's obviously not designed for it, and obviously the low memory clock speed is going to probably cause some stutter here and there. But as you can see, it's perfectly playable at high frame rates if you absolutely needed it to. Obviously, you'd want to pick a better graphics card for that, or obviously a lower resolution in this case with the RX 560. But still, for 60 FPS, it is absolutely, without a doubt, more than capable of doing what you need it to do. And I'm sure streaming games with the CPU and hardware encoding in that case, maybe with the graphics card, if you have a little bit of leftover horsepower like technically I do in this case, should be no problem for a system like this, even still to this day. Minecraft server, not a problem. That sort of stuff. Oh my god, how did I miss that? Wow, I took a big fat L on camera. Anyways, I'm not playing this to actually like seriously play it. I just wanted to show you all that this thing has no problem playing a modern esports title like this, if you will. It's modern esports. Well, has some customization to it. But yeah, CPU usage-wise, we are doing just fine. I'm sure that something like GTA Online is no problem for a system like this because it tends to love the more cores and threads you give it. But obviously the GPU, once again, would be the bottleneck because it's only an RX 560. But it is what it is. So I suppose it's probably as good of a test as I can make it because, well, the one game. But you get the idea. I mean, this thing is definitely going to be even more beastly once I upgrade the processors to the X5650s. Then we can really try to flex what they can do with a more powerful or more modern graphics card. Heck, I even considered throwing the RX 580 from my main system in this thing just to see what it could do. But I don't know, maybe not. Let me know if you want me to actually try that down below in the description. I almost said that. Wow, I'm really getting tired, you can tell. In the comments, rather. Anyways. So for this video, at least, that'll wrap up what I have to show and say about the Dell Precision T5500 workstation. Now, obviously, like I said, there's going to be more videos using this system in the future. I do plan on doing some stuff with Linux distros, maybe some future gaming videos, some graphics card testing videos, and that sort of stuff. And the reason why is because, obviously, I could use my main system for some of that stuff, but, you know, obviously I don't want to add a bunch of write cycles to the SSD reinstalling drivers on my main computer. So I can't have that happening. So I'd rather have a sacrificial system for these older graphics cards. Like, for example, if I bring it into frame here, this old 9800 GT, you know, hey, this would be perfect for this system down here because it'll allow the card to reach its maximum potential. I don't really need to throw that in my main system for that and waste write cycles installing an old driver in Windows. Well, I don't really need to do that. And another thing too, this system is fantastic if I need to run Windows 7 or Vista or even XP, an XP 64-bit, because all of those operating systems I just mentioned are fully supported. Yes, this thing can run XP 64-bit. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. But yes, even with Xeon X5650s, 2 of them, 12 cores, 24 threads, 12 gigs of RAM, it doesn't matter. You can run XP 64-bit on the system with driver support from Dell, which is just absolutely ludicrous. And I do plan on doing that in the future, so stay tuned for that. I don't know when it's going to come out, but yes, Rob from my Discord, you know who you are. Obviously, yes, you're going to get your wet dream. So with that having been said, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit the thumbs up button. And of course, if you didn't, you know, the other button works too. You can get subscribed if you want to see more content about this system or perhaps more entertaining content. And obviously, don't forget to click the bell so you know when I upload new videos. Anyways, thank you all much for watching. Catch you all in a future video.